Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast, brought to you by InView, LawView's community for in-house legal professionals, where we dive into the heart of the legal profession to bring you unfiltered discussions with industry titans on a broad spectrum of topics.
Hi, Megan. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I would love for you to introduce yourself to anyone that's listening. Tell us a bit about yourself, your career, and I guess what you do, who you are.
Thank you so much, Emma. It is such a privilege to be here and an honor, and I really value these opportunities to connect and share a bit about what brought me to where I am and what I am passionate about and why I feel I am putting my energy into certain things to help make the world more of a place that I wish to live in and a place that I wish my daughter to live in as well. So thank you. This is truly a privilege.
Oh, that is so nice. And I've been really excited for you to share with us your career journey because it is incredibly impressive. And just, I love the way that you kind of have had such a impressive and your career is amazing, but through that, you've also obviously had a personal journey as well, becoming a
Yeah.
mother. So we're going to talk about that
Yep.
today. But tell us a bit about what you're doing at the moment, what's going on in your world.
I will. I will. Thank you. So I'll start by saying, ever since I was young, I had a burning desire, this real internal urge to be a lawyer, and through being a lawyer, help the world, change the world in some way. I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 7, and I
Oh,
always
wow.
envisioned myself in court fighting for justice. There was something about it I felt like being a lawyer gives you that ability. And that was really my guiding force from a young age. So it really informs many, many decisions, if not all decisions, I took throughout sort of growing up. And at one point, I remember asking God for an opportunity to help the world through law. And that was around the time that I was applying for law school. So I was in the States, it's where I grew up. And I remember getting to law school thinking, wow, I'm really living my dreams. And after law school, I followed my heart to London. And from there, I would say my path becomes perhaps not what I expected it to be, though I believe it was all sort of part of this overall journey and where I am going. In that, as a New York qualified lawyer in London, I practiced US securities laws at one of the sort of magic circle firms. And though I felt perhaps that day to day work of advising clients on significant transactions, such as initial public offerings on the London Stock Exchange, was a bit far from perhaps that lawyer in court fighting for justice that I had set out to be, I did feel the work I was doing was meaningful and it gave me purpose, not least of which because I was often one of the only women in the room. And therefore, it felt like I was really honoring the women who came before me and helping lift up those that would come after me. And also, alongside my client work, putting a lot of time and energy into diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, particularly around gender equality advocacy. Um, for example, something that I remain to this day very proud of and feel it was very important was in 2016 instigating and leading my prior firm to ban use of dear sirs in favor of gender neutral language. And we were the first Magic Circle firm to do that. And I felt that you can really see that as a big shift of people's awareness and thinking about, wow, language really does matter. So that was a big part of, that was a very big piece of my career. And then, as you alluded to in what you had just said, at one point in that particular path, I was very lucky to find who I consider my soulmate, and we got married. And then I was pregnant, had my daughter. Um, and that's really when I felt what I now look back on as a dark night of the soul, real transformation. If you're not familiar with what that means, dark night of the soul, it felt like everything I thought I knew about myself, about my career, perhaps even about the world, my identity, seemed to collapse. I was no
Hmm.
longer just a lawyer, which was so much of my identity, if not my sole identity.
Mm.
I was now a mother. Oh my gosh. And everything that brought to the surface about really what am I doing in this life? What is my purpose? What did I set out to do? Where am I going? All of those sorts of questions. And my daughter is turning 4 this coming weekend. And I would
Mm.
say these 4 years have definitely been discovery of, okay, who am I actually? What is my true nature? Where am I going? And so that sort of entailed a few different career moves, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk more about. And so most recently, I have transitioned away from capital markets securities work into environmental, social, and governance work, ESG, which I feel is really critical for our people and our planet. And yeah, and I feel very privileged to be working within that area now.
Wow, what a journey. And I am so excited to dive into this in a bit more detail because there's so many questions that are coming to mind. I guess the first point the first area I'd like to kind of cover off is, having a career in corporate law. What was it that initially drew you to this field, out of, all the different kind of areas you could have gone into? Especially with the I guess the reputation of corporate law being demanding hours, kind of working around the clock on deals. And you mentioned you were quite often the only woman in the room. It's a an area of law, I guess, that a lot of women will maybe shy of just because of the, you know if they're thinking long term and wanting to have a family and stuff. This is just kind of stuff that you, I think, start to think of. And not to say that only women think of that, but it is got that
Uh,
reputation for being like around the clock. So what drew you to that area of law, and did that kind of demand ever put you off, or did it cross your brain?
mm. I have to be honest with you, Emma, and say that that thought really didn't cross my brain. The only time it crossed my brain that there were, it seemed almost like, let me give you an example. One of my early professors in college, a political science professor, he had given me this book because I was very clear with him that I was absolutely going to law school. I was absolutely going to be a lawyer. And he gave me a book. So this was around the year 2005, called The Destruction of Young Lawyers. And he gave it
Oh,
to me as a
wow.
cautionary tale. Yeah, really, honestly, I think trying to put me off the profession. And honestly, I disregarded it because I thought, okay, I was so determined. And having grown up, at the time that I did, truly believing, you know, women could do anything. We reached equality. We went through the women's rights movement. There was absolutely nothing we couldn't do. That's really how I was raised. That's what I believed. I never, honestly, would have ever anticipated what I then experienced in my career when I became a mother. And so I felt nothing about corporate law sort of put me off. As I said, I guess it wasn't the area. If I had stayed in the States, perhaps I would have practiced, but it made sense because as a New York lawyer, that is what I could practice here in London. But yeah, I would say early on, nothing really occurred to me in that area of, as a woman, I might be sort of disadvantaged, or it was only then when you start experiencing things throughout as I started experiencing things throughout my career that I became aware of actually how women still are facing inequities and injustices. And yeah, that the real turning point for me in that regard was definitely when I became a mother.
Mm. If we look at your career in corporate law, because you've mentioned your kind of transition to another area now, what would be some highlights for you, and what was it like being in those in a Magic Circle firm in London? I'd love to like kind of know what that experience was for you, highs and lows as well. Like I can imagine there's, you know, both sides of the coin there.
Absolutely. And I remember when I had left that my first job, that role, I had made a list in my diary of all of the incredible blessings that I had through that role. So absolutely, there were many of them. It really brought me into this world of sort of privilege and money and the feeling of, wow, we're really doing something that matters. Whether that was always real or imagined, I'm not sure, but definitely, as I said, advising on transactions that were high profile, industry significant, in the Financial Times. That absolutely gave me a big buzz, and I found very exciting to really feel like we were, doing something, just that feeling. And what came with that, things like traveling to countries that I would have, probably to date still have never been to. It was my first time to the continent of Africa, for example. I got to live in Hong Kong for a year. Um, things like that. And sort of, yeah, also experiencing, I think, sides of London, like London social scene, immense privilege that just come from where I'm from would have not been a world I think I would have been exposed to. So yeah, absolutely, those sort of things that come with it, and also what really felt like a privilege and challenge, the intellectual challenge of being able to work on these immense transactions for well-known companies, at critical moments in a company's history. So there was definitely a lot of there was a lot there was a lot to like about it in that respect.
Wow, it sounds pretty amazing. Like it sounds like something you'd see in a movie, really. Kind of that sort of is what I am picturing in my mind. Like all the swanky parties and the big names and the travel. But also, I can imagine there's that side of it, and there's also a more grueling,
That's
demanding
right.
side of it as well.
Absolutely right. And I think it's that funny thing when we look back on which of those we focus on. But I mean, absolutely right. That what then also came with that was a feeling that really my entire life was my job. It was truly all consuming. Um, I would, for a lot of stretches, would eat all three meals at my desk. Um, would always have the sense that we would always have to be available no matter what. I had a prior partner I worked with who would say that the firm had an option on our time, meaning, we may not always be consistently busy, but when there's a transaction or a client that needs something, the firm has an option on your time to sort of call you back in. And I think for me, on just perhaps the way that I am, I think that definitely manifested itself in a bit of sort of constant anxiety because you just never quite know at any moment what will happen, what will come up,
Yeah.
when will a client need something. You could be, there were stories we heard of, a partner about to step on a plane to go on holiday, and he gets the email from a client that, something needs doing. And so his family goes off and he comes back to the office. Things like that. So,
Yeah.
perhaps less extreme as an associate, but I don't know, different in its own ways. So, yeah,
Mm. Wow, it's yeah, I can imagine that kind of like bubbling anxiety, not
yeah,
knowing when things are about to kick off, like being not at work, but not really
yeah.
not at work because you were thinking about work, and it kind of that long term, I can't imagine how that would be. So, how did becoming a mother change your perspective on your career in corporate law. I'd love you to talk us through that whole massive change that you went through.
Thank you so much. I feel like this is such an important topic, and I think one that we don't talk enough about. This idea of what happens when a woman becomes a mother, and it's such a unique experience for each of us that goes through it. There's this word I think that's becoming more popularized, but it's not very well known, called matrescence, which means the process of becoming a mother, basically. And what I always say is that there's no way to know how you'll feel as a mother until you become one. And so certainly prior to becoming a mother, when, as I just explained what my reality was like, I, perhaps in some abstract way thought a little bit about what that, what it might look like once I become a mom. But I really only felt it when I truly went through it. And suddenly, when you've brought life into the world, you have responsibility for another human. I then started feeling, well, gosh, how could I go back to the existence I had? How can I exist as both all consumed lawyer within 24/7 work culture and actually have my priority be on my daughter and having space and energy and time to be there for her in the way that I would want to show up for her? And so, very early on in my maternity leave, I started having these feelings. And unfortunately, I didn't feel that there were many people, honestly, if anyone, because there were so few women that I could speak to about it. And that was part of the problem, because I I definitely regret looking back how much of my maternity leave I spent in that state of confusion, anxiety. How was I going to make it work? Then I went into problem solving mode, lawyer mode. Well, how can I make this work? How can I fix this? What can I do to really reconcile both, my former identity of lawyer and my new identity of mother? And, in addition to that, I think really still there's not I think despite more women speaking up about it, still not a true and fair understanding of the physical, emotional, mental, psychological, practical, logistical demands of being a mother. And I think, especially, well, I mean, maybe everywhere in society, but definitely in the legal profession. And I think one reason for that, or the reason for that, is that if you look at the data, disproportionately, the people that are in leadership positions or the people that hold power are men. And so you don't have that same experience. Um, and so I think without having that experience, you don't have the same appreciation or understanding or incentives to change, to put in place the changes that would be needed for more women to stay within the profession. So yes, it was definitely a difficult time.
Yeah, you are so completely accurate when you say that you can never understand it until you've been through it. And that goes, and that's why it is so hard to know how you're going to feel in, because everyone's experience is so different. And you're right, like, how were you to know how you would feel after you've had your baby, and what that would then look like from a work perspective? Because you just can't explain it. You just have it's lived experience, right? So
Yes.
how did you navigate that transition then? So you're on maternity leave, you're realizing that your around the clock job is not going to work with your other around the clock role of
Yes.
being a mother, right?
That's
Like
right.
they're both.
That's right. That's right.
So how did you
Yeah.
start to kind of be like, okay, how am I going to do this? Like, what did that look like for
Yes.
you?
Yes. So, I would definitely say as a lawyer, one of our primary roles is as problem solver. And so I
Hmm.
absolutely went into problem solving mode. How could I make this work for me, for the firm, for my daughter? And given everything I had been told for nearly 10 years within the legal industry at my firm about retention of women, really caring about gender equality, really wanting to even out the disparity, the gender imbalance at the top levels of our profession. And on a personal level, having been co-chair of the Women's Network and being, personally intimately involved in these kind of conversations at high levels, I never ever thought that I would have a problem in solving this. So I put together what seems extremely reasonable, a proposal, a flexible working request, which was focused around my main concern as a mother that 24/7 working, no predictability, just always on, always working. That was the piece that I needed control over. Because for many reasons. First of all, childcare only exists certain hours of a day.
Yeah.
Second of all, as humans, we only, I believe, have finite energy. And if so much of my energy was going to work, what energy did I have left for my daughter? You're taking care of another human. Things like, when people say, oh, just, put your child to bed and log back on. I always say, well, like, wait a minute, because children tend to not operate on that kind of schedule. They don't want to go to bed and then you're exhausted, things like that. So, what I was really trying to solve for was predictability.
Mm.
So, my proposal that I put forward was to work fixed hours. I didn't necessarily know of anyone who had done it before, but it made sense to me. So, by then I was about a ninth year senior associate, so very capable, competent, well regarded, well liked by clients lawyer. And I wanted to put in absolutely the effort that I had been putting in to date, but I wanted to do it between the hours of, let's say, 9 to 5. So there was
Mm.
a shut off switch. So I wasn't always on edge on email. And again, based on everything I had believed and known, I thought, well, great. I thought it would be sort of, welcome as, oh, great, let's try something else. And maybe this will help us retain more women, which is our
Mm.
goal ultimately.
Mm.
So you can imagine my true shock. And I struggle sometimes to put it actually into words how I felt. The, yeah, true shock and upset and disbelief when I was told that that would not be possible. I was told things such as that would not be possible in a client facing transactional role. I was told I would have no value to the firm if I did that. I was told if the firm accepted this, they would be doing so just to keep a woman, which they weren't going to do. And it left me, yeah, just really shaken about
Wow.
what are we really doing here? And are we really going to back up our commitments? And yeah, that's sort of the position I was in, really by myself with no one to talk to, feeling, yeah, just as, yeah, very vulnerable as many new mothers do.
Oh gosh, I like it's hard to even. I think you said it at the start. It's like we've come so far, and then for something like that, you just realize, have we really come that far? That like such a reasonable request as a new mother who's returning to work, that's not an option. Like it just seems. Yeah, I can imagine why you felt so almost like defeated, I guess, like for
Yeah,
everything you've put in, all the years, all the work, built up a reputation, someone that delivered. And regardless of all that, like it's still just no matter of what it was a
yeah,
reasonable
you're right.
request,
You're
you know?
right.
Like you
You're
don't
right.
need to have be the top person to make a request like that. It should just be you're human
Yes.
That's it.
Yes,
Like
you're
it's
right.
like the human element was out of it. It's like you're seen as a bit of a robot as a corporate lawyer, and to have this very human request was almost like that doesn't work here.
That's exactly right. And I feel it's also dishonest when language is used around like it's impossible, because I feel, of course, it's not impossible. Anything is possible. We just have to be able to commit resource to it. So we have to structure teams differently. Perhaps it also means we wouldn't be making as much profit on a transaction. But again, you are then making a choice. And so I
Mm,
think it's intellectually dishonest to make it sound like it's a law of gravity, which is, I remember reading this in a book once, like when you are focusing on some of your advocacy, um, you really have to ask yourself, like, am I fighting a force like gravity? And it took me a really long time to think about it. And I've really come out that no, we can change our systems and structures. We don't have to accept this like it's gravity, that it's just a force of nature that we are powerless to fight against.
mm.
And yeah, unfortunately, at that time, it didn't seem. Yeah, I don't think there was enough. I don't know, enough desire, perhaps,
Yeah.
to make the changes that were really necessary to be able to retain more women.
Yeah. And so then what did you do with that sort of like, okay, like that's not going to work then? Did you decide to just say, like, well, this won't work for me? Or did you then try and see if you could make it work in the way that you had worked before leaving to have your baby?
Gosh, yeah, it's I did so much soul searching, so much soul searching. There's so many heightened emotions around that, of whether, yeah, you're like you say, whether try to do it in the way that they've proposed or walk away. And honestly, I wish I could almost experience what it would have been like, in a sliding door scenario of what would have it been like if I had tried versus walking
Mm,
away. Um, because so the choice I ended up making was, well, I couldn't see it working. I couldn't see going back physically to still do this role, this job as mother, and still feel like I had to make my priority my work, which is this kind of job. I feel like that's what it means. I feel there's, examples or instances I could share around how I felt like you're almost asked to not be human. It's like because, just the demands, the pressures. So I did not think it was compatible. And so I had made that clear and decided to leave. And that's when I went in-house, to try and see if that would be, yeah, to try and see if that would be a better option.
it's yeah, I'm still just wrapping my head around that because I can see how that would be such a sad moment for you as well, and so much of your identity had been as, like when you talked about wanting to be a lawyer, like you're obviously still a lawyer, but
Yeah.
like your identity had been this corporate lawyer, and then in such a blink of an eye, it's kind of taken away from you, and it's hard because like the legal profession has been so male dominated for so long, and I think you see so many more female leaders now, but it's they'll still be I have no doubt that there's so many women still experiencing this in law, outside of law, but like it's just, yeah, it's so nice to hear you actually just talk about what you went through. So when you went in house and saw that as kind of maybe a solution to being more family friendly, more flexible with work, having that predictability around your workday, how was that experience?
Yeah, it was definitely a challenge. I think the coming from what I had experienced, what honestly was, real trauma,
Mm.
trying to then transition into something new, was very challenging. Something, very, very different to what I had been doing, and kind of made me feel far from the kind of lawyer perhaps I wanted to be.
Mm.
In-house was, yeah, it was very different. It was very different. And I would say I am very grateful to have had that experience because getting what I was really after in terms of having set hours, working 9 to 5, it really did just give me that perspective of, wow, this is what it's like to be able to truly shut off your computer, shut off your phone, not have to have that constant anxiety. And so it did really open my mind and heart to more well-being in the legal profession, the importance of life outside of work, things that for the first whole part of my career, I'm not even sure if I thought about it, to be honest.
Mm.
Just because work always came first, it had to. So it was, yeah, I definitely think it brought me a lot in terms of lessons and experiences that then continued to inform my beliefs and my advocacy around how we can change the legal profession and our systems and structures to be more inclusive and to be healthier for all of us.
Let's talk about that well-being in the legal profession. I constantly see reports around like mental health in the legal profession being, so many people battling with mental health, well-being not being prioritized, even though there's words on the wall saying like we
Yeah,
prioritize, you having we think well-being is so important, but then in practice,
yeah.
that's not what you see in terms of like the lawyers in the law firms, the in-house lawyers in the corporate environment. How have you, I guess, prioritized well-being throughout your career, and what has that kind of, your experience from going from private practice then into in-house, and then how has that kind of shaped what you want to do moving forward?
Hmm. So definitely on a personal note, I've always been physically active. I've always wanted to eat healthily. Um, so I guess there were, even from the outset of my career, things that made me feel perhaps a bit different. Things like every lunchtime that I could, I would go for a run. I would like consciously go for a run, get some fresh air. I felt like it brought me so much. And I had instigated at one point a team spin class, just trying to bring in a bit more well being and change the culture a little bit away from what I perceive to be very sort of work hard and then play hard. But that play was always around like drinking at the pub, staying out late, things that perhaps are not actually conducive for well being to my mind. Um, but I think the the real culprit is that I believe, yeah, hinders well-being is I guess what I've, already been talking about, this always on, always working, 24/7 work culture.
Mm,
And I just cannot imagine that with everything we know, and all of the technology we now have at our disposal to work smarter, that we would not all collectively agree to tone that down. So we do
mm.
have more opportunities and time and space to enjoy and be in other aspects of our lives. And I felt like that was really what being in house gave me, a window into what that would look like. Um, I think even when I hear now the term work life balance, I no longer like it or agree with it because
Mm.
it makes it seem like there's just two aspects of your life: work, which, you know, you know, probably is going to be the most important thing, and then life. I feel like actually what we should be talking about is just life balance, where work is
Mm.
one aspect of it. And then you choose to fill it in however else would bring you joy, contributing to a full, rich human experience.
I still think it's also sad that you had to leave private practice to get that insight into what it could be like, that there wasn't the opportunity for you to see that with like in the firm that you were at. I think that's, it's a shame really, because there will be so many people that have been on that journey of being in private practice, and then, maybe they wanted to have their full career in private practice, but because of life reasons, they have exited because that wasn't an option. And I think there's so much work to do kind of in that space so that you can have your career wherever you want it to be and enjoy that aspect of it. So for you, kind of, obviously you went in house. Where did that kind of where did you go on to from there? Because I know you've gone back into private practice. So what was that sort of decision process for you?
So, I think the whole so it was 1 year I spent in house, and it's still the feelings I had were very unsettled around why I felt I had to leave the career I had built, that the particular career I had built within capital markets. Um, and I felt still unwilling to say that what I was asking for was impossible. And that led me to really, double down in a sense on my advocacy for exactly what I was asking for, which is, like you said, Emma, within any organization, within any sort of area of law, whether it's private practice or in house, for organizations to offer alternative working arrangements as a matter of course.
Mm,
Because for many reasons, one huge one is that if you're an organization, like many do now, that says you are really promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's something you care about, that's something you're working on. To me, it seems like absolute common sense, cannot argue with it, that if you're only offering one model of working, you will not be able to attract and retain all the diversity that you would
mm,
otherwise be able to. So after my sort of, 1 year in-house, I still had this feeling that I want to try it again. I want to go back to capital markets and try it again.
mm,
And so I went in and was doing 4 days a week, which for a time, I thought, I was definitely very much in favor of. There have been, as I'm sure you've seen, there have been different sort of I guess programs where certain organizations are undergoing like a 4-day work week for the same pay for people, just so, and the results have been absolutely positive. People are more productive, etc., happier. So yeah, I tried it in a bit of a different way. Ultimately, though, I felt I still had that unsettled feeling of things could happen at any time and there was no shut off switch. So it was still the same feeling, but when I was there, um, back within capital markets, was when I then realized, as I continued to do my gender equality advocacy, that that is actually one piece of a much bigger puzzle of ESG. That DE&I is one piece of ESG, and so that's the direction I decided to go in.
Obviously all these different changes you've made in your career, and some of them have been so significant. There's been the life changes as well. Do you feel like now you've got to a point where you've really kind of reconciled your identity as a corporate lawyer and as a mother? Like, how is that for you today?
Oh gosh, I thank you so much for asking that. Um, such an amazing question to just to have the space to reflect on that. Um, I would say now coming up to my daughter's fourth birthday, as I said, and now being a few months settled into my current role, which is, as I said, within ESG, but as a knowledge lawyer. So I do
mm-hmm,
have the set hours that I've wanted. I do actually feel that I have been able to reconcile, and I feel like I would even now use a more positive word than reconcile. I would say I'm able to sort of thrive or blossom within what no longer seem like such contradictory, you can only have one priority, contradictory identities, but actually I feel like it all feeds in. Now it's harmonious again because, I'm working in an area, ESG, that I feel is so critical for our planet, our humanity, our future generations, our children. And I'm able to still be advocating for the changes I feel we need in our profession to enable more inclusion, particularly for mothers. So I have space and time to do that as well.
Mm,
Um, and also be able to have just a playfulness, the ability to come home from work, truly have been shut off and go with my daughter into our playroom and play, dolls or, make believe and, bring out that side of me, which I feel is so important for everyone just to, still maintain that sense of like creativity and playfulness that we all had as children and maybe we lose over the course of our lives. Um, so yeah, I would say it's after, yeah, an incredibly, incredibly dark journey at times. I feel very fortunate to have been able to eventually see the little bits of light and then be pulled closer towards it, and now be back on what feels like a path towards the future, taking all of the lessons and the really hard times with me.
mm,
Um, Definitely not only for myself, but in furtherance of what I believe we can truly do in the world, in our profession, to make it more inclusive and healthier.
mm,
I love that, and it's so nice to hear that you have got to a point where you're thriving. You feel like, and I think as well, I got told it's work life harmony. It's not necessarily, it's not
That's
balance, but
beautiful.
work life
That's
harmony. And I
beautiful.
think that sounds like you've really got these different aspects of your life all kind of like really gelling and you know, going, working well together, which is so nice to hear. You're doing a lot, like you mentioned, advocating for women and mothers in the legal profession. I'd love you to share a little bit about that. And I guess, what are you, I think it's after hearing you speak, it's clear why this is so important to you. Um, and so what's most pressing for you at the moment in terms of raising awareness, and what is your hope for the legal profession by doing this?
So, my absolute aim is to rectify the gender imbalance within the legal profession. And let me explain that a little bit more, which I'm sure many will be familiar with, but I think this is really important. So, what we see in the legal profession is that over the last 30 or so years, men and women have been coming in equal numbers. But if you look at the data on numbers or percentage of partnership, it's still only around 30% women. And at some of the sort of, top most prestigious firms, it's definitely less than that, more like 15 to 20%. So there's clearly something blocking women from making it to partnership. And, I feel like we all know this. The data is extremely clear, but somehow that's where we stop. But I feel we absolutely know what is causing this and how to fix it. So, a huge contributor is what is known as the motherhood penalty. And so, again, there's sort of a graphic demonstration of this, which I think is, really helpful and clear, where men and women's careers before baby are sort of, more or less equal. And then the first child comes, and men's careers still just moving like nothing happened. Women's careers basically fall off a cliff and then
mm,
take a long time to get back, if ever, to where they were, but certainly not where the equivalent man's career is.
mm,
And I believe that is the biggest contributing factor to why women still disproportionately are not within the highest levels, not within partnership. And that is not to blame becoming a mother. That's not to blame women. The point is that we expect partners to be operating under that model of 24/7 working, always on, always working. And as I've shared within my own personal experience from so many of the women, lawyer mothers I've spoken with, that honestly, when you become a mother, I feel is no longer a luxury you have to focus so much of your time and energy to that same extent. And so I think unless we are prepared to make the required changes, by which I mean offering alternative working arrangements, we're not going to fix this. So that's a big one. That's a very big one that I'm advocating for. So offering alternative working arrangements as a matter of course, that both women and men, anyone who wants to dial down at a time in their life for whatever reason, that they
Mm.
could choose. The other big one that I've also come to believe fairly recently, it suddenly struck me that I just don't think it is right to have maternity leave and paternity leave because I think that in itself reinforces or creates the gender imbalance that we then
Mm.
are trying to fix. And so I really started believing in the importance of gender neutral parental leave,
Mm.
which would absolutely empower mother or father to take that time as they should. Because, I think this is a really big contributing factor where you've got a woman who gives birth, goes on maternity leave, but then you hear stories of, a father whose, perhaps partner has given birth, but he's back at his desk like 3 days later. Clearly, that is not, clearly that is going to play out in their careers. So yes, so the two biggest points of advocacy that I believe in are alternative work arrangements, meaning just not one model of always on, always working, and gender neutral parental leave.
Mm.
And I think in the bigger context, fostering a culture in our profession that is de-emphasizing work, work, work as the most important thing at the expense of everything else, and more, wow, we are human beings with needs and, need to rest, desire to be with friends and family. There's so much else in the world, in our lives. It's only recently that I've had the absolute privilege to volunteer at a homeless shelter for women. And every week when I go, I think to myself, I never felt like I was able to do this when I was an always on, always working culture because you
Mm.
never knew. How could I commit to being, at the center at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday? I couldn't. Where now I think, gosh, like just to have this opportunity and experience to be here serving these beautiful women. And I wish that for more people. So, yeah, toning down the work is the most important thing as well. And I think firms are able to do that. I mean, we're forensic in our data collection. We know how many hours people are billing. I went through a point in my career where this was the hardest part, I would say, the hardest point when I was billing so many hours so relentlessly. A partner from a different office told me my number of hours were inhumane. But that was it. That's where it ended. It wasn't like, let me try to help you fix it. It was inhumane. And so I feel, and I've seen this recently, someone was advocating for this, that we should, law firms should impose, and if not law firms, our regulator, our regulator in the UK should impose rules around this. We should not be working so many hours. Again, we are only human. It's not
Mm.
right. And we've seen the horrifically tragic consequences of this. Um, so, yes. So I think focusing more truly on what changes we can make for well-being. And just the last one I would say is fostering a culture of non-contactable holidays. I had this experience when I was about a mid-level associate. I went on holiday and I switched off my phone. And I got back, and a more junior lawyer came into my office, sort of, a bit angry with me, telling me that it's been noted that I'm not contactable when I'm on holiday. And I was like utterly perplexed looking at him, thinking, surely this is a good thing. Surely you would want this too. But somehow feeling like I needed to apologize and explain myself. And so through that experience, and a few others, I also believe in and advocate so strongly for non-contactable holidays. Please, your work will always be there when you get back. You have teammates, ideally, who can cover for you. Everyone deserves that. Go experience another country, another culture. Go do something different. Forget about work. Strip away from your identity as a lawyer. Just go be free in nature and
Yeah.
see what other aspects of yourself can come to the surface.
I think it seems like, and I think this is why I was so excited to get you on the podcast as well, because if no one talks about this out loud, nothing will change, and
That's right.
there'll be so many people out there having a similar journey to what you've been on and thinking that they're alone and that there's no solution. So what would you say to those people that are, maybe at the start of their legal career thinking, oh my goodness, like how am I going to have a long career when I'm constantly on, or I want to do other things in my life? Like I want to become a parent. I want to be a mother or father. What would you say to those people? Any advice or like anything from your experience that you think can really ensure that they do get to have those experiences?
I do. And I've thought a lot about this because at one point I started feeling a bit nervous, that I was becoming, was I becoming that sort of jaded, or disgruntled senior associate, senior
Yeah.
lawyer, discouraging, which would never be my intention.
Mm.
Because, truly, as I've said, I feel so privileged to be a lawyer. I love being a lawyer. I, intend to stay as a lawyer and hopefully continue to be able to do meaningful things through being a lawyer. But I think the advice I would give is start as you mean to go on and be brave in standing up for what's right for you. Don't feel essentially bullied into what you might encounter as the status quo. I do feel hopeful, actually, and optimistic that, and I think a lot of people have been observing this as you look at the sort of younger generations coming through, they do have more of a focus on life outside of work, and they perhaps will be doing things a bit differently. I've seen this certainly with more junior lawyers I've had the privilege to work with. I've seen responses on emails about not being able to work late one evening, for example. An exchange between a junior lawyer and a partner. And I remember, reading that thinking two things. First, oh my gosh, I could never imagine saying that as a junior lawyer. And two, thinking, amen. Thank God that she is doing this. And I think that's also part of the mindset switch of, you have sort of one camp of more senior lawyers who think, well, I had to go through it, so now you have to suffer.
Yes.
And then there's the other camp, which I, of course, am in, which is I had to suffer. I will absolutely do anything and everything in my power so you don't have to, because that is how we bring about a better society, social change, a fairer world, a more just world, a healthier world. And the other quote I keep coming back to is something that Gloria Steinem, the incredible women's rights activist, said in an interview once, which is that the stories of each other's lives are our best textbooks. And because we're each unique, if we've shared many of the same experiences, then it must have something to do with power or politics. But if we come together and unify, we can act for change. and we can make that change happen.
Mm.
And so that is really what I would say to, lawyers of my generation and older, and definitely of younger generations, that please don't feel you have to accept what you have come into. You can bring so much to the industry and help us truly make the changes that would enable so many more people to lead healthier lives and remain. Um, so yeah, please be bold and brave and be your true authentic selves. Don't feel like you have to conform. That's what I would say. And please feel welcome. And yeah, I have a lot of optimism in that respect.
I feel like this is such maybe a great point to kind of close off the conversation, as much as I would love to keep talking to you, because that is just such amazing advice. And I really hope that anyone listening can take that on board, because I think it's so important, whether you're a partner, general counsel, if you're a junior lawyer, if you're anyone that's got the ability to use their voice, it's equally as important to kind of bring about that change. And I think that's everyone I've spoken to through this podcast or who I've encountered is, they actually love being lawyers, and it's about making it an enjoyable workplace for the future for everyone, no matter what they have going on in their lives, whether it's becoming a mother, becoming a father, who knows? There's so many other exciting things that happen outside of work that I just hope that, people can continue to bring those in and be their true selves and not feel like they have to conform to this robot that works around the clock and doesn't have feelings or emotions or human needs. And so I just want to say a big thank you for, I guess, bringing this to the surface and talking about this and raising awareness of it and sharing your journey, because I love that kind of that quote you shared as well, because I think it is just that's exactly the crux of it. Like, we don't have to accept that. So yeah, thank you so much, Megan. I've just absolutely loved chatting to you.
Thank you, Emma. Honestly, I value this so much. So thank you from my heart. I hope that some of what I've said is helpful. Like you said, if anyone is out there feeling like they are alone in this, I always welcome, connections, messages on LinkedIn. I always want to be there for anyone who might need, someone to listen. And I also hope that if my words are able to make it to people who are in positions of power, please know you have a choice and you can make a difference and you can make change.
Oh, thank you, Megan. And I will put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes so that anyone can get in touch if they would like to pick up this conversation with you, have a further chat on any of the topics. Again, just a big, big thank you from here in New Zealand to you over there in the UK.
Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed listening, please hit follow and leave us a review on your listening platform of choice. We love engaging with our community and hearing from you, so please head to inview.lawview.com. Thank you so much for tuning in.